Twilight's overdue library book and Quibble Pants' Buckball family breakdown. Are these two plots worthy of generating 2 quality episodes to hopefully ram Season 9 back into gear after an inconsistent fortnight that preceded it? Well, let's find out on this double-header edition of Pones N Stuff. We start with the point of no return, and well, I'm left a little speechless at what I have witnessed. Never in my time watching this show have I seen an episode that was as soulless, empty, or surprisingly awful as this one. Making an entire plot surround around an overdue library book is as asinine as things can get, but when it's so thinly veiled and lacking in substance, everything about it falls apart. It runs at too fast a pace to allow the story to naturally build steam, leading it to pad itself out with needless cameos that added nothing to proceedings, time wasted with 2 montages that were so similar to one another you really couldn't tell the difference, meaning they weren't being able to be used effectively in actually, building up pace, and they had characterization that was to type, but overdone in other episodes where it just had nothing of value to offer. It got to elements of the story that other writers and episodes would have taken time to actually get to, blowing their load quickly about 3 to 4 times within the first 10 minutes, leaving, honestly, all the room in the world to make such a barren concept somewhat compelling without actually giving it anything to work with in the first place. And the icing on top of that cake is that they kept Dusty Page's look in the modern day from us just to hold our suspense. That was all we had. Are they actually going to find her? Well, it proved fruitless when that change from her first appearance early on in the episode to the second was a slightly lighter shade of hair. Riveting viewing, ladies and gentlemen. That is what counts for entertainment in 2019, seeing how much a character has changed, and nothing came of it. It's ridiculous. Speaking of that characterization, Twilight's socially anxious and overly concerned ideals of her perception is something that mattered some 4 to 5 seasons ago. It's something that should be long in the rearview mirror considering her character growth. She fretted more about this and showed more proactive tendencies in this moment compared to the Season 9 premiere. That is fundamentally wrong, and she continued to flanderize herself in going through with a plan that she believed was perfect without thinking of any of the consequences. I've already gone on about that before, but to note it here in this clusterfuck of madness just makes it even worse. And when you also consider that everything this episode threw at her meant pretty much nothing at the end, from the book title to the fine she paid, all she fretted about was completely moot and pointless. Even Spike's comedic quips couldn't make me smile. It was the barest minimum required to make him function, with him looking and acting as frustrated as all of us in watching something we've seen a million times before with no sense of direction to even attempt to guide it. Not to mention, why the hell did he randomly start working in the tasty treat from Season 6's Spice Up Your Life with no real inclination as to why behind it? What the hell was the point in all that? This entire premise is also easily cut apart with logic. Surely Dusty Pages or some other library orderly could have warned Twilight about the overdue book by either contacting her parents or Celestia, her teacher, to send a scroll to inform her. Reminder, she has a dragon that can receive bloody scrolls, so why did it take the equivalent of 2 in-series years to get round to this? It's convenient to the plot, but honestly nothing else. You'd expect even in the voice acting there'd be something to grasp from it, but Tara Strong did not go overboard as she usually would do in voicing Twilight, because maybe she realised it would get too grating to constantly happen in an episode so devoid of life. Maybe she foresaw just how bad this was going to be and phoned it in as a result. Who bloody knows, but I would hedge a bet that this was indeed the case. To round out the craptacular pile of crap that this is, the visuals and audio were starved of any sense of relevance, even though Anderson's score tried to get some semblance of drama from an overly serious episode that was laughable in its lazy execution. And sure, it has continuity with prior episodes in said cameos and that aforementioned restaurant, but no one, I repeat, no one ever wondered what the hell happened to a book that was on top of a pile during the pilot pilot episode some 9 years ago. Nobody looked at that book and thought, ooh, I bet someone is going to be analysing the crap out of it, notice that thing's fallen off somewhere, and wonder where the hell it went to. Who the hell greenlit such a dumb idea for an episode? It has such little of redeeming quality that my brain is scraping at itself from the inside, just trying to find one. So it seemed that this episode was going to be cast into the eternal fires of hell for its sins against my critical criteria. And yes, I love the alliteration I've just made there, but it's the only way I can actually crack a smile, because this episode has made me want to punch it over and over and over again, if anything I've already noted is any indication. However, just when I was ready to kick it in the balls when it was already down, panting, wheezing, and bleeding from the skull, it gave to me a trump card, a moral about letting perfection not define you, that you can let it go to lead a better life, and learn from your mistakes. Now surely a moral as well regarded as that had really the best intentions of this episode at heart, that could seriously do something wondrous, miraculous, akin to the Champions League victories of Liverpool and Tottenham Hotspur, those kinds of beautiful things. Unfortunately, this moral is the only thing that the episode had to stand on. It built its entire structure and existence around it, which meant that under any form of criticism that chips away at its facade, it is left without a defense to muster, making its fall from incredible heights much more devastating. The first time we got an idea that maintaining perfection overwhelmed Twilight and broke her down was Season 2's Lesson 0, but the main moral of that episode focused on friends being mindful of others' mental and physical well-being, which is basically what the moral at Party of One should have had, frankly. Regardless, it meant that this moral had a perfect setup only to not use it when applicable. Hell, it would have benefited Twilight, as I said, back in Seasons 4 to 5, when she was still trying to find her place as a princess and hold up to some certain standards and conventions of what royalty gave to her. To have it happen in Season 9, after she's been through so much, learnt from and made so many mistakes, it makes its application completely out of place here for something so trivial in contrast to everything else. And while it was great for Dusty Pages to come to that conclusion, it doesn't benefit Twilight herself, as it's one that she'd need time to adjust to over multiple episodes, which she doesn't have. Considering that we've seen her already adapt to it in the past, to have it let it all go for the sake of this episode's fragile stability makes this episode feel even more wasteful than it already is. Even Dusty's declarative statement that letting go of perfection can lead to a more bountiful life doesn't hold up, as the standards everyone has are so wildly different you're not going to get a consensus view, and doesn't really cover all the bases. She had to retire to come to that conclusion. Many others will not have the luxury of escaping or even achieving perfection. Settling for the norm is what's good enough for most people, and they will take that. Its importance as a moral then fluctuates to where it can't be taken seriously, and while I will appreciate that this moral can be used by the audience at home to benefit themselves and search through themselves to find out whether they are living the life they want to, which is the only good thing that this episode has given to me thus far, it would depend entirely on individual circumstances as to whether it has an effect. For the characters that it was meant to benefit, it came far too late for it to actually do anything, and it didn't make a difference. This was a good moral that sadly was used to bolster an episode that just didn't have what it took to even make it worth the time, and that's not a good thing. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure what else I can really say, because this was an episode with almost nothing good to say about it. At least the episodes that I've despised over the years, Spike at Your Service, Baby Cakes and the Showstoppers, at least they offered up one redeemable quality, or at least tried to make a story out of what little they offered, even though they failed spectacularly. This, in comparison, barely even amounted to what can be considered a minimum. After watching, I was left apoplectic with rage that such an abysmal excuse for animated entertainment was greenlit. This somehow passed a production committee. Can someone explain to me how that was even possible? Because after looking at this, it should never have done so. And this should be a lesson to all writers out there. You work inwards. Write the story to house the message or morals you're teaching or implying. Do not wrap the story around a moral concept and work outwards from there. Otherwise, you'll end up with something as faceless, incredulous, and befuddlingly destitute as this. Overall, The Point of No Return scored a total of 1. Yes, 1 out of 25, which is an E-. And to quote Spitfire, that's an Academy record. Yes, you heard me right, new territory has been found, new ground has been broken. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the holy grail of rubbish, poor, abysmal, putrid, crap, shit MLP episodes. And why am I so excited? I should be horrified. Maybe I'm excited at the fact that, oh my god, an episode has come along that's proven that my rating scale has a new bottom rung. I mean, sure, it's not a 0, it's not an F, but it was so damn close. I was excited yet horrified to even see it get to this point. A 1 out of 25. Up until this point, I have never rated anything below a 2. So, you can kind of see just what kind of incredible, brave new worlds this has unveiled to me. There are episodes out there lower than the lowest of the low in the cases of the ones I've reviewed. And the fact that this was Gillian M. Barrow's last episode as an MLP writer just makes me sad, because sure, her episodes were average at best and mediocrely bad at worst, but I never expected this. I mean, it's just a good moral wrapped up in the equivalent of excrement, really, and if this is your parting gift, Miss Barrow, then I'm just really disappointed. But there's one thing I can say with absolute authority. The fact this is called The Point of No Return is fitting, because there is not going to be another episode in the seasons I've not yet finished reviewing, or this one that is going to match it. You can be assured of that. And you know what's amazing? I've spent so long ranting and stating this episode's failings that I've completely forgotten I still have another episode to get through. Common ground, for the love of all that is holy, please, give me something better. Given what we know about Patton Oswalt's family life, seeing him do an MLP episode like this that builds on his own experiences and struggles that he had, integrating now-wife Meredith Salinger into his daughter Alice's life, is a heartwarming gesture to see it be put into this, hoping to help parents and children understand those struggles that an incoming parent has to make. It's decidedly more adult fare for MLP than many would expect, but at least the writers knew that when a topic or message is important enough to showcase, they will do it. However, despite that knowledge, I still had some hope that I would be able to see something to rival the biting and entertaining Stranger Than fanfiction, given Quibble and Rainbow Dash's involvement in this. However, in a departure for the sake of both characters, we didn't get that. What we got instead was an episode that was down to earth and more mature than its season 6 counterpart, as it dealt with the strife of familial integration post-divorce or death, something that outside of season 7's Surf and or Turf we'd not seen. But this was on a different level in comparison, not utilising feuding and choosing between sides, but the bittersweet task of attempting to enable discourse and trying to make yourself accommodating in someone else's, in this case a child's space, in the calmest way possible. Of course, Quibble wasn't calm during pretty much all of this, which added some tragic comedy to it all, if you think about it that way. The fact that the show treated it with as much care as they did was commendable, as it didn't rush things and tried to show those at home just how hard a new person in a parent's lives will try to make themselves fit, and while it was squirming-inducingly painful to watch on many occasions, it was done with a purpose, not to sugarcoat it or do it for major laughs, but handled it with a sense of duty that I find quite honourable, especially given that Quibblepants and Rainbow were involved. It could have easily turned into parody, but swayed away from that nicely. And given that Patton and Meredith and Alice all had to experience this, you feel like they had a sense of duty themselves to make this as realistic to humanity as possible, because if it wasn't, people would find it quite distasteful. He knew coming onto this that this kind of episode would need to be done properly, and by the looks of it, they managed to do it. And seeing Quibblepants, a character who, based on his last appearance, was so in control of everything, to not be, just has a great way of highlighting the weaknesses that we rarely saw in his lone appearance up until then 3 years ago, showing just how fast a character's life and perception can shift. Rainbow's loyalty to help her friend was great, but showed a weakness in how her standards of athleticism doesn't seem to work every time, and while it did work somewhat for Fluttershy and Scootaloo in the past, it again shows the downsides that her blunt methods have, which is good for her in the long run, showing that she needs to be grounded to come to good solutions. It's worked a lot of times in her other episode plots, so to see it happen here is a good sign. Our other guest stars managed to hold themselves up quite well in relation to their more stable-footed counterparts, let's put it that way. Meredith Salinger's minimal role as Clear Sky was empathetic and softly spoken enough to convey the motherly tone the character needed to put forward, while showing some range when necessary to give her more depth. Whilst Alice did a surprisingly good turn as Windy Spirit, portraying the skepticism that a disgruntled child in this situation would have, as well as being, sporty and boisterous. It's what you would expect from a person who could be young Rainbow Dash, sounding much more like a kid than almost every child character that the show has highlighted thus far, which is kind of strange when you think about it. Look back to other child characters in this show and tell me that they do or don't sound like children. It's kind of confusing, and now it'll put a spin on you every single time you rewatch this entire show back. All of what I've highlighted sounds pretty positive as far as I'm concerned. Except for those people who shipped Quibble and Rainbow, because now you can't do it. I bet you're squirming on the inside knowing it. To see an episode such as this be so cohesive with its story, narrative, writing, and voice acting, it's just stunning. I know this is a TV Y-rated show for kids, but to have so much depth and quality on show is it's just fantastic. And you know what's even better? That even though there are little things I can find that are slightly wrong with pieces of it, they're so obscure that I really don't need to care too much about them. This episode, like I said, has nothing really terrible going against it. Or so you may think, because ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take the sheen off of this episode a little bit and expose to you some of its qualities that aren't, that pleasant in contrast. Because while they may not be entirely negative on face value, they do enough damage to where this episode won't achieve the heights that it seemingly has set in its eyes from the beginning. The buckball backdrop was a nice nod to continuity and gave the world building some nice feathers to add to their bow, while Snip showed how much of an arse he is, dragging Snails into a money-making scheme to conveniently take him out of the episode and push it into the direction it ended up taking, which came out of left field so early on and disrupted the flow of it to some extent before getting on the right rails. Not to mention, after seeing them on screen together for years and years, we can finally see that the tiny-statured Colt is the instigator of Snail's poor behaviour as a character and record on screen, making Snips himself look like a right piece of work more so than their prior appearances have ever indicated. However, it did offer a nice contrast between their money mentality and Quibble's sincere attempts at showing he cares, so I guess it has a purpose, and in that regard it did rather well to showcase it. And while the Buckball was nice to be seen as this subtle B-plot for Pinky and Fluttershy to get involved with and add something to the whole story as a whole, it didn't have enough room to facilitate itself and proved to be more an ingredient that made the cake rise rather than have immense flavour be added to it. It felt like an afterthought, and while that was warranted to create the nerdy versus sporty dynamic that Quibble and Windy Spirit gave off to it, it could have been given an episode entirely of its own without needing to be placed somehow forcefully in here just to instigate the wider picture. Now, visually and audibly alongside all that, these elements created a framework of existence, let's put it that way, with very, very minimal offerings, but gave not much else. However, knowing that this episode had a lot of weight to carry on its back, it was a necessary sacrifice to not allow them to do much to ensure the episode ran smoothly and focused on those characters. And while at times that weight was a bit overbearing for it, as it made it weak at the legs by pushing its moral of not trying too hard to impress someone and accept someone for who they are, as well as appreciate what their efforts are no matter the guise, they pushed that so damn hard that the episode had a hard time trying to keep it all balanced. It had to be dramatic enough while giving you just enough humour to get it through to ensure that it wouldn't push the runtime to the plot's limits, but thankfully it did enough to swim to the other side and not be too exhausted. At the end of the day, unlike the overdue library book that shall not be named, this episode had a plan from the start to execute its story with passion and a sense of sensibility that carried it almost all the way, and while at times I found it overbearing and quite cringeworthy to watch, and very difficult to watch I may add, it had enough qualities to take it to the heights that if it was handled by others, it would never have reached. The negatives are small in the broader picture, but significant enough to make a dent in an episode that took itself too seriously, but with the right frame of mind to make it look effortless and productive in equal measure. Overall, Common Ground scored a total of 15 out of 25, which is a C+. In closing, we have once again hit a roadblock of inconsistency, where the gap between the episodes may have been smaller, but my god, the difference between them could not have been more apparent. We have the worst episode I have ever reviewed that has somehow allowed me to retain my sanity after watching it, and an episode that was this show at its most mature and realistic. That is such a divergence in quality that is on a different bloody level. I mean, the fact that Common Ground only lost out audibly and visually is a little bit disappointing, because it definitely had the ingredients to be a lot more than it was, but it did enough to warrant a good above average C grade, and that's a good thing. Whilst the point of no return was just putrid, it was horrible, it was despicable, it was utterly dumbfounding, and I'm just happy that I've been able to allow myself the time to tear into it, because if that's the example of this show at its worst, I don't want to see anything that could even potentially surpass it. If I have to give something a 0, I think I might as well pack up and go home, because it's proven that something is that bad. But thankfully, Quibble Pants and Patton Oswalt and his wonderful family saved me from a pit of critical despair. And I'm once again, I'm tipping my imaginary hat to you guys for making such a great episode, even though it didn't reach the heights that I believed it could have, and it barely matched up to Stranger Than Fanfiction. It holds a special place in this show's canon and the hearts of many, so I can't be too critical over the rating it received. So with that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, I am hoping that next time out, with the next dual-headed episode review that I do in a fortnight, can I just have 2 episodes that are roughly within the same letter grade or score as each other, please? I don't want this to be a roller coaster of incredible emotional heartbreak, please. I mean, since this season has begun, it's okay, had a decent and very good premiere, but then it's gone down and up, and just, please, stabilise the ship for God's sake, because if this keeps happening, by the end of the season, I'm not going to have much to really say. Apart from, well, it's more inconsistency for LP Season 9, this is not the way to end it. All I can say is that I am praying to the Lord Almighty and Celestia that it can just happen so I can take a rest and not lose my sleep over it. I have been Freddie Thomas, you've been people watching, this has been the CC Network, and I will see you all next time when I review She's All Yak and Frenemies.